Hey, so this is Tim Wertz, for another session of the Gospel of Wow. This session is called The Naked Now, Drop the Fig Leaf, and I'll get into the title and what it's all about in a few minutes. But if you will, let's just take a few moments. That's the thing about meditation, right? Or contemplation. You really don't have to have a lot of time to. So let's just sit, actually open to whatever experience you're having right now, right? This whole idea of now, we hear about it all the time, especially if you've been on, any type of spiritual path, whether it be Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, of course, The Naked Now. There's a book written by Father Richard Rohr. So just check in, just kind of check in, which on one hand, right, on one hand, it sounds as if it's you doing something. You're checking in, and you can do that. You can kind of scan your body, check in. There's a part of you that's checking in. A different way. I think it could be more effective way, but a different way is to simply open, right? I mean, to psychologically, physically, spiritually, just it's almost a softening, a relaxation, an opening to this moment. And in this opening, this relaxing, you're simply allowing whatever's present to be here, and without any attempt to really try to control it. And even if you do try to control it, that's okay too. So let's just check in to start today. And this can occur anytime during the day, right? You don't need to have predefined meditative periods to do this. And I want us to check in just because this whole session today is about the present, right? It's about what we're calling the naked now, unadorned, open, and the idea of the fig leaf, the metaphor of the fig leaf. So I'd like to start the session. Let's start it actually with what been calling a wow quote, right? And every session's had a quote that epitomizes or embodies this idea of wow, right? Wonder, openness, willingness to engage. And this is from Einstein. Now, Einstein's often misquoted, actually. There's a lot of quotes out there by Einstein that are not actually his. But this is from an essay he wrote called The World as I See It. So this is literally taken from an essay. Now, we all know Einstein, I'm sure. So you can almost substitute the word world if you read the essay, and it's pretty short. I recommend that you do. The world as I see it, life as I see it, the universe as I see it, existence as I see it. He's trying to share how he sees existence itself, right? And here's how he begins. It's going to be kind of a long quote, so just sit back and allow it to come to you. He starts, the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. Whoever does not know it and can no longer wonder, no longer marvel, is as good as dead, and his eyes are dimmed. His eyes are dimmed. He goes on. It was the experience of mystery, even if mixed with fear, that engendered religion. I mean, this is his opinion, but I believe that is true. At some point, humans along our line of growing as part of life discovered the mysterious, right? Could be as simple as stars in the sky or something in nature. And it can often come with fear, the mysterious. So he feels like that experience was what spurred the religious or the spiritual, if you will, desires. He goes on. A knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate. A knowledge, knowing that there's something that we cannot penetrate. Our perceptions of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which only in their most primitive forms are accessible to our minds. We can sense there's something greater, more profound, right? The profoundest, he calls it, profoundest reason, radiant beauty. We can sense it, even if it's a primitive sensation. In this sense, and only in this sense, I am a deeply religious man. I am satisfied with the mystery of life's eternity and with a knowledge, a sense of the marvelous structure of existence, as well as the humble attempt to understand even a tiny portion of the reason that manifests itself in nature. So he fully acknowledges this great mystery, right? And the fact that we can only kind of sense it. But he also acknowledges this thing is very, very human, right? This humble attempt to understand it. This tiny portion of the reason. And notice he has reason capitalized. So to me, that's his word of creator, God, the logos, that manifests itself in nature. And by nature, I would say creation. So that's the wow quote. And it's a side of Einstein, perhaps you already knew, but if not, go check it out. He was a deep thinker, not only in science, but obviously also in life in general. So the question I've got for you is, how do we try to penetrate the profound? That's what he says. He said, to penetrate the profoundness of existence. How do we try that as humans? Since this is in our hearts, right? This desire to know, even to know dimly, is in our hearts. How do we do it as humans? One very common way is through stories, right? Stories within stories within stories within stories. Matter of fact, for each session, of course, each session had a particular topic, and each topic was kind of what I referred to as a wow factor of life. Where life, universe, existence is one, but also meaning, relational. It's constantly creating. It's conscious, and through consciousness lies freedom. The last time, right, the wow factor of life is that it is growing, if you remember, right, the blind optimism of a tree. So the wow factor this session, life is story, and story is life. Now, we often just see ourselves as things, people, walking around, interacting with a lot of other things, planets, right? Look at the stars. We can even have a concept of who we are, how we got here, all that kind of stuff. And that the stories we tell are just kind of later on top. And later on, it's just something, it's kind of a human thing. But I'm saying we, being part of life, we're not separate from life. We're not we're our life unfolding too, right? If we live within story, which we do, then life is also story. Stories are as real as a rock, right? They're maybe at a different level, but the stories are real. So life took a turn and we began living out a story. One could say, if you're very biblical, that the Bible is just showing a story unfolding. Or if you embrace just a very evolutionary frame, that's an unfolding, living within a story called evolution. But life is story. I just want to make sure we understand that this is very powerful, this idea of story. It's not something to be taken lightly. So let's start with the story of the name, the Naked Now. And I've already indicated that Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan, wrote a book over a decade ago called The Naked Now, and it was his attempt, and I think he did a really good job of just talking about Christian contemplation from his perspective and using scripture. And it's really an easy read, very short chapters, and even the chapters are broke down into very specific questions. You can sit and read it. And I did read it a while back, so I do want to give credit to Father Rohr. But there's another Naked Now that I knew about before Richard Rohr. And I've shared with you before that I grew up reading comic books, still enjoy going to these superhero movies with the boys. I loved Star Trek. I'd come home, it was already in syndication, right? I'd come home and watch Captain Kirk, Spock, Bones, Scotty do their adventures after school. That would be the first thing I'd do before anything else, is watch Star Trek. And then in the 80s, they decided to bring a new Star Trek out. That was a big deal. It really was. I was in college at the time, but I was kind of tracking it. It's like, what? How dare they? Right? They were dealing with the gospel of Star Trek. And it was called Star Trek: The Next Generation. All new characters, right? And it was like, how is this going to work? And in season 1, everybody's watching with a critical eye, right? You get to know all these different new characters. You don't have Kirk and Spock and all them. But in season 1, episode 3 was an episode called The Naked Now. And it was an interesting episode because they're in their version of an Enterprise and they come across an old ship. It'd been floating in space for a long time, and they get on it and they realize it was a former space ship from the space fleet, and everybody's dead. They're all frozen to death and they're all naked, right? They're all naked. The only people who aren't naked are actually people who were in the shower. So it's kind of got flipped. And then they don't know what happened, but they get this virus, kind of a psychological virus. And throughout the episode, what you see, these characters that you really don't know yet, because it's only episode 3, these characters who have to stand up against all the characters from the previous show, have to like be their own people. This virus reduces your inhibitions, right? So people start wearing bright colors, right? They start expressing their love, or they get very flamboyant. They allow their personality to come out in a full, fleshed out way. And it made for an interesting story, right? Because they dropped a fig leaf to some degree. And of course, by the end of the session, they've kind of recollected themselves, but now you know them at a different level, and they know each other at a different level. So the naked now, I think, kind of applies to that, because we do constantly go through living out our own story of who we are and how we behave and everything. So they dropped the fig leaf for that episode. And by the way, if you do watch Star Trek, I think the Next Generation ended up being far superior than the first. Just my opinion, but I did want to share that. But the fig leaf, right? The idea of a fig leaf is also in another story that perhaps you're familiar with. A story from Genesis, chapter 2 and 3, the Garden of Eden. And before people could read is like they do now, right? A lot of the biblical stories or stories in general were told through paintings. So this particular painting is called The Expulsion from the Garden of Eden. It's Italian painter Masaccio, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but it's back in the 1400s, right? 1425. Now look, if you're looking at the computer, look at it, right? You see Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and you notice they've got fig leaves on them. However, those fig leaves were added hundreds of years later when the culture became a bit more prudish, and they're like, "Well, we need to cover them up," right? Now in the 1980s, they took the fig leaves off, and they also, what did they do? They kind of renewed the painting. So you see the original painting here. So if you think about it, this entire story shows the many layers of stories within stories. There's the story of humanity, the story of Adam and Eve, the story of feeling shame, covering yourself up, but also the story of the culture. Hey, you can't show your private part, so they paint a leaf over it. And then the story of culture saying, oh, no, we got to go back to the original. So that's what I mean by us living within story, within story, within story. Now, in Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, I'll take from some of the scripture here, you probably all know, God, I guess, takes a business trip, right? He's hanging out with them. He must go somewhere or whatever. Then he comes back and he's like, where are you? Because he can't find them. Where are you? Right? What if you were asked right now, where are you? The easy answer is, where are you physically? Where are you emotionally? Where are you spiritually? Where are you in the arc of your life? Where are you? Well, in the story, Adam, who is hiding, he answers. He said, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Now, keep in mind, the whole idea of Garden of Eden is it's a paradise. You don't really have to do anything, which is not entirely true, because he was supposed to name every animal. That's a lot of work if you think about it. Include insects. That's pretty brutal. Fish, take a lot of time. But these are new things within being a human. The idea of fear and nakedness and hiding, right? Shame. These are new things here. And then God responds, who told you? Who told you that you were naked? Who told you that you were naked? Now we'll get back to the story of Adam and Eve in a little bit. But who told you that you were naked? Who has told us? How have we been told what we consider right and wrong? Our own personal story. That word who, that question who, I guess, is very, very powerful. So one of my favorite bands, they weren't the favorite, but they were one of them. They were very popular in the 70s, but the Who, believe it or not, the Who, right? Um, and they actually had a song, their most popular song probably, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's titled, Who Are You? And the lyrics are pretty simple. Who are you? Who, right? I really want to know. So they're asking this question, and it's not just a rock band asking, who are you, right? Who, the question who is profound. It's a profound question. It's profound enough that when Socrates is asked what should be, the greatest goal, right? And he says, to know thyself. But not only Socrates, St. Francis. So Frank, some of you may be familiar with the story, but basically he was trying to, at some point in his life, decide which path he was going to take, right? Path of the family had laid out, the story of the path that the family had laid out, or something different. And it occurs to him, I love this part, when I gaze upon the stars. To me, this is the embodiment of what Einstein was saying. When I try to take in existence, when I try to open to life, I'm awestruck. But when I gaze upon the stars, and the only thing he could ask, and he did this over and over and over, was, who are you, God? And who am I? Who are you? And who am I? Moses, of course, in Exodus, in the Hebrew scripture, was retired, for crying out loud, right? He went through his all adventures and everything. He was just herding some sheep, and he gets called on the mountain, kind of a calling up to go to the mountain, comes across this bush that continues to burn. And he asks, who, in the bush, i.e. Yahweh, tells them, you need to go free the slaves and bring them out of Egypt. And he says, who shall I say sent me? Who shall I say sent me? And Yahweh, the unpronounceable one, right? He says, I am that I am. But because of the verb tense, it's not only that, it's I am that I am, or I am becoming that I am becoming. Being and becoming is how God self-identified in this story. There's another example, and this example is Ramana Maharshi, if you're familiar with him. I think it was in the late 1800s as a young boy. Also, similar to Francis, about to live out as a youth, the story laid out for him. I think there were farmers, and he was supposed to just help run the farm, take it over, whatever. I'm not quite sure, but still, there was a story laid out. Had his own existential crisis, and either thought he was dying, let's say like a severe panic attack, or he was doing a kind of some type of reflection on what it would be like to die. And he got through it. But the question that kept coming up during that panic attack, that thinking I'm about to die, was, who am I? Who's about to die? What's about to die? And in case you don't know, Ramana had this, this profound spiritual enlightenment, if you will, because of this deep penetration of who am I, and moved off and became a spiritual teacher to the point that he didn't speak for years. People had to take care of him. But then when he started speaking, it always pointed back to who's asking the question, right? Because And some people would say just being in his presence, just having his eyes glance upon you or being in his presence was enough to, wake you up. So this question of who is very, very powerful. So who am I? So ask yourself, who am I? And let's start actually, let's do a little reflection, contemplation on who we are. Actually not embracing our own story, right? Embracing the story of our lives. So if you will, just sit, take a few deep breaths, please. You can close your eyes. Relax. Now I'm going to ask and give some guidance, ask some questions and give some guidance. And just allow whatever to arise, without having to tell your own story in your head. Just allow all the images or sensations or memories of your life almost to flash in their own random way before the eye of your mind. Where were you born? Where was your childhood lived out? What are some of the moments and memories of pain and joy that come up when you reflect on your own story of your life? What are the stories of your values or your beliefs that you hold strongly? How have they changed over time? What are the stories now that give you hope or cause worry? What is the story of your hope for how the rest of your life unfolds? If life is indeed precious, then these stories of our lives are precious. So without giving much effort, just sit, experiencing yourself within the story of your life. How does it feel to be you at this moment? Allow the answer to be present without any resistance. On your next inhalation, please breathe in a bit deeper, filling your lungs, holding for just a moment, and then release, exhale, and open your eyes. So often on the spiritual path, spiritual practices, we're continuously trying to transcend or get beyond our story. I really wanted us to just embrace it for what it is. In the fact that it too, though it doesn't feel liberating, accepting it, being with it, has a form of liberation. So what are stories if they're that powerful, right? I think we all kind of know it. We understand it, but I think it's interesting to explore a little bit more so we could take the next step and the next contemplation. The simple answer, stories are words, a bunch of words strung together, right? And words are sounds, right? So we can, we breathe out, we have vocal cords, we've learned to talk. So words are sounds. That's all they are. One time I was in an airport in Portugal, and it was a work trip, and I was complete with work. I was done with work. It was a long week, and I was sitting there ready to come back home. And of course, they were speaking Portuguese. Most of the signs are in Portuguese. It was a combination of being tired, relieved, ready to come back home, and the fact that everything around me was in there. It was just sounds. It was purely sounds. My mind did not have to work to convert any of this. And I had this experience. I mean, it was like things would come and go, an ease of peace. You know, it's not anything I would write home about necessarily, but I remember thinking, and I think the fact that I wasn't enmeshed in words, my mind wasn't constantly translating or thinking or responding. So words are just sounds at their very core. It's important to remember. And sometimes in meditation, we can treat even our own thought process or thinking, the words in our thinking, as sounds. But words are also pointers, right? The sound tree, which is a word, tree, is not a tree, but it does point to a tree, right? So we can kind of talk about something with it not necessarily having to be there. Words are pointers, but they are abstractions. Tree is not a tree, it's an abstraction. And it's funny how we can often live most of our lives rambling around in abstractions. And they're metaphors. Words are metaphors, they're abstractions. They can be, and often are, very connective, bringing people together. It could be as simple as ordering something off of a menu. That's the way we connect. I would like to order this, But words can be connective, but they also can be divisive. We see both all the time. Even more so, I would say, with constant social media. Words could be very divisive. They can be inspiring. And I think we all have been inspired by different words, whether it's something we read or something we hear, but they also could be despairing. They could be liberating. They can free us from false stories or false ideas, or help us see something in a different way. It could liberate us. But they also are often very limiting. They could paint a picture of who we think we are, who we think other people are, how we see life, that limits the possibility of our experience of life. Words can be very hurtful. I'm sure we've all both received hurtful words and also expressed hurtful words. And they can also be very helpful, right? And I'm sure we've done that as well. The bottom line here, words are powerful and they are real. You remember that wow factor, right? Life is story. Despite them being abstractions, being ephemeral and all that, they're very powerful. You can look right now at almost 99% of how you live your life, even at this moment, are due to stories upon stories, words upon words, including everything that had to happen just to have Zoom calls. All the understandings we had to have to even create computers. The fact that we had to create language so you can understand that. The clothes we wear, the fact that we decide to wear clothes, the type of clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the fact that we drive on certain sides of the road. I mean, these are words, they're very powerful, right? The fact that we live, whether it be a democracy, the type of government, those are words, those are ideas, very, very powerful. All right, so we've asked the question, who am I? So now let's ask, who are we? Who are we, right, as a people? Because we're not separate. So this is important to kind of think, not only just, who am I? Think individually, but who are we? Because we are constantly nested within each other, within cultures. So let's go back. Who are we? We're a type of creature. We are a creature that tells stories, right? That's fairly unique, I think, to the human species, even though we're fully part of life. That means life tells stories. So we tell stories. And let's go back to the Garden of Eden. I love this picture by Thomas Kincaid. It's kind of a more of a modern day. I always find it interesting, right, that Adam and Eve are so extremely pale. So even though it's nice weather and everything, I guess sunscreen's not needed. But and all the animals, just wandering around, and you can kind of dip your feet in the water and have nothing to do but eat fruit all day. But speaking of that, from the Garden of Eden, from Genesis, it says, God calls to grow out of the ground every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food. By the way, this creation story comes after the previous creation story. So there's two creation stories in Genesis. So it creates trees, good for food. And it's like including the tree of life in the middle of the garden. as well as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So this mythic creation story is a story, as we'll see, I would say, of human psychological development. The previous one, the 7 days of creation and how everything built on each other, is more of a cosmological story. So this is more of a psychological story, trying to embody something that happened within the growth of Homo sapiens that changed. So it's represented by these two trees, right? The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So who are we? We are a creature that seeks knowledge and wisdom. You remember Einstein saying, even being humble, attempting to penetrate, attempting to understand at whatever level we can, this great mystery. That seems to be built into us. Now, this painting is interesting. This is by Alex Grave. You're familiar with him. He always paints the people almost transparently. I kind of like that. And this particular one, of course, is Adam and Eve eating of the fruit. But it's a reminder, right, that the story we wear on our face, the clothes we wear, how we appear, is just a story too, right? Because we all are flesh and blood, right? We all are similar in the way we are inside, right? We only kind of judge by appearances. And also he represents often the aura, the spiritual aspect of being human that we don't see either, the glow of being human. So in the story of the Garden of Eden, they eat of the fruit, as you know, and it says their eyes were opened and they knew they were naked. And then the blame game started, the blame game. So who are we? We are a creature that likes to blame, right? We want to find the other and somehow put the blame on them. Or we can obviously take the blame ourselves, but nonetheless, we love blaming. We want to figure out, okay, whose fault is this? And if you're familiar with the story, of course, God's like, who told you you're naked? And then he realizes they ate from the tree. And listen to Adam. It's kind of funny here. I mean, in a bad way, I guess, to some degree, but he totally takes zero responsibility. He said, the woman you gave to be with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate. So not only did he try to push it off on Eve, he was like, hey, you're the one who gave her to me, type of thing, despite all the crazy sexist positioning there. It's just our ability not only to blame, but also to obscure responsibility. And then, of course, Eve's like, well, it was the serpent. He deceived me and I ate. So not only do we play the blame game, right? We perpetuate it. We perpetuate the blame game. So this cartoon here, I think, is pretty poignant in its wisdom. I mean, you can look, right? Adam sitting there just munching down on the apple, the fruit. He says, who gave you this? And then Adam says, hey, it was the woman. And of course, Eve's like, well, it was the serpent. And then the serpent like, okay, I see where this is going. Fine. And where it's going is throughout human history, we've seen constant blaming, othering, causing all kind of problems. Why is that? Well, the beautiful thing of stories is we can create words and stories that are inspiring, but we can also create ones that are, that are not, that are harmful, that are hurtful. So who are we? We're a creature that suffers disappointment, loss, judgment, separation, death. Self-consciousness, self-awareness comes with a awakening. So the eyes were opened, right? But also it comes with there's a beauty to it and there's a burden. And pulling from the story of Garden of Eden, right? God sent them away from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which they were taken. So life became a life filled with some suffering. Now, we often look at these, especially these paintings, and we just kind of take it all in. We know the story behind it. But I really want to zoom in on this particular painting to Eve and Adam, their faces, right, and their body postures. So being expelled from Eden, of course, is a mythic story of separation and shame. But what we do know as living creatures is the type of suffering shown here. I think it's captured very well in their faces, of being betrayed by somebody we love, or of losing someone we love, or of great disappointment, or of some tragedy that just simply breaks us apart. That is part of life, right? And this story attempts to capture it, to penetrate it, as Einstein would say. Who are we? We are creatures that seem bound and intend to live waiting, right? We live waiting. This is a sign, it's a joke, right? Free beer tomorrow in the bar. Of course, you come back tomorrow and it says free beer tomorrow. So there's never tomorrow. There's always something, right? And we're always waiting. We're always waiting to get something else accomplished, right? Before we actually can just be here, fully accept our lives. It seems like it's built in. It's almost like we're either going to have to go back to Eden, or we're going to try to create our own paradise, but we seem to have this ability to, regardless of what we do, what we accomplish, what realizations we have, to at some point to feel like there needs to be something else. It's kind of built into us. So Joe Walsh, in case you don't know him, he was a guitarist for the Eagles, right? But he had a solo career before the Eagles, and he had a successful solo career after being in the Eagles. And I like him. He's my favorite Eagle just because he had a sense of humor. Right? He didn't take himself so serious, and a lot of his songs reflect that. And my favorite song of his is called "A Life of Illusion," and I think it's appropriate for what we're talking about here. And it was an album, There Goes the Neighborhood, that he released in late 70s, maybe 80, I'm not sure. A Life of Illusion. Here's some of the lyrics I think that are appropriate to what we're exploring. He sings, sometimes I can't help the feeling that I'm living a life of illusion. And oh, why can't we let it be and see through the hole in this wall of confusion? I just can't help the feeling I'm living a life of illusion. So he's sensing this illusionary quality of life, right? This ephemeral quality. He senses it just like Einstein is talking about sensing these profound truths. And he goes on in the song. Pow, right between the eyes. Oh, how nature loves her little surprises. Wow, it all seems so logical now. It's just one of her better disguises. And it comes with no warning. Nature loves her little surprises. Continual crisis. So when it does hit you, right, whether the illusionary quality of life or anything, it's like a pow. It hits you hard, right? And I just love the idea that it's continuous, right? These disguises, these stories we live within. So that's Joe Walsh's take on A Life of Illusion. So the last question we'll ask and go into contemplation after this. So who are we since we explored who am I, who are we beyond the stories? Who are we beyond the words, the concepts, the stories? So how can we penetrate this question? As Einstein would say, penetrate the profoundness of this question of who. Now, we answered earlier, stories themselves, right? Stories is one way we tried to do it. But also contemplation, or if you will, meditation. That's another path. It's the path that's not often chosen, but it's a path that is direct. So I'll end with this quote from Thomas Merton, the great contemplative Trappist monk from the 20th century, on contemplation. He says, true contemplation is not a psychological trick, but a theological grace. It can come to us only as a gift and not as a result of our own clever use of spiritual techniques. A theological grace, a gift. Cleverness is a tool of the mind. So who are you beyond your story? So we'll stop sharing and simply ask you to, let's take another few moments, close your eyes, breathe deep, 2 or 3 breaths, relax in yourself. Now we've just had a lot of material exploring stories that have shaped our culture and our lives, even exploring our own story. I will ask a question. And I'll ask you to discover the answer without using any words. And if words come up, don't worry, just ignore them. And I'll ask it a few different ways. At this very moment, who are you without any stories? At this moment, what are you beyond any words or descriptions? Our minds want an answer. Our minds will volunteer an answer whether we ask it or not. simply relax, open, and be the answer. What you are is always already present. There's no need to hide. This very moment, this naked now, requires no effort whatsoever. Hear the sounds in your environment, the sounds of my voice. They come and go. There's no need for control. Feel the sensations of being in a human body. There's no need to label them. Let them simply be present. Notice any mental activities, thoughts, or emotions. Allow them to be just sensations, sounds surrounding you, coming and going on their own without care or concern. Notice if there's any desire to have any particular experience, to know or feel some form of grace. And know that that is nothing more than another desire. This is it. Nothing more is required. You are with and you are fully a part of the mystery that is life. This is that. For our final minute together, simply let all things be as they are. You have permission to do nothing. Relax. On your next inhalation, please breathe in a bit deeper than normal. Fill your lungs and release, relax, and open your eyes. I am really